All right, thank you. Well, welcome everybody to our panel talking about whether the shift of power in the world of sports is trending towards the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we have an esteemed panel here today consisting of Townsend, the CEO of SURJ Sports Investments, Massimo Calvelli, the CEO of the ATP Tour, and Marc, the founder and managing director of Sportscorp. Welcome everybody. So I'm just going to mention a few sports assets to you that I thought was interesting. So the Italian Super Cup, the Spanish Super Cup, you've got Cristiano Ronaldo and Carmen Benzema, among other stars. You have the Dakar Rally, you have UFC Fight Night, you have Live Golf, you have the Formula E Grand Prix, you have the Saudi Cup, which is one of the most famous and popular horse races in the world. And everywhere in the world, everybody would say, oh, that would be an amazing year of sports. Well, that's January and February of this year in Saudi Arabia right now. So that tells you a little bit about where things are going. And I'm Thomas Rudy. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Lead Sports. We invest in sports and health technology assets all around the world. And I've had the pleasure to attend almost every single FII, so I have seen the growth of sports in the kingdom as well. This summer, if you want to see the FIFA Club World Cup, you either have to be here in Miami and try to get a ticket, or you can watch it on TV on DAZN. And Danny, I think you know a little bit about DAZN, given SURJ Sports' investment. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Look, we've obviously announced our deal earlier this week on a minority investment in DAZN, and the rationale for that is very much around the future and the way we see the change in consumer behaviour, the way we see the broader economics of the sports sector changing. I think personally that my view is that the sports sector is probably going to come under some challenging times as the economics around sport change over the next decade, and sports that manage the transition from a linear past to a digital future are going to be the ones that really make strides. And I think our view is that DAZN is well placed with the market shifting and the way that the history of the company being, I suppose, competing in a linear rights market with the digital customer. That the market's coming to meet DAZN now at the right level, and I think we're excited about what it can do for not just the sports we invest in, but the sports fan more generally.
Excellent, and can't wait to watch the programming now that you guys are involved. Massimo, as the CEO of the ATP Tour, obviously tennis is your world, and you've recently made a few trips down to Saudi Arabia because the PIF has become a big partner sponsoring the rankings. Tell us a little bit about your view of the sport in Saudi Arabia and the growth of the ATP Tour in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been an interesting journey. We had a few opportunities to partner and collaborate with Saudi stakeholders back in 2017, 2018. There wasn't a huge amount of appetite from our side until summer 2022. We spent a long afternoon with PIF in our offices in Wimbledon, and we just went over a potential long-term strategy for tennis, which we loved, and that changed things immediately, overnight. We ended up taking the first official professional tennis event to Saudi Arabia in 2023, our next giant ATP finals, which we were very happy about. Followed about a year ago with a global strategic partnership, which I think was a catalyst for us in accelerating the discussions. Been investing, I think first and foremost, PIF has been very supportive of our strategic direction, which we really liked. So they helped us accelerate and boost strategic priorities around supporting young players coming through the ranks and breaking through. Investment in technology to ultimately democratize access to performance intel for all the players. You can see how the top guys in the world, Sinner, Alcaraz, they have access to all the information and the intel that they need, but it's not necessarily the same as you start coming down the ranking. So they help with that and a number of other initiatives that ultimately supported our strategic priorities. Now we have ongoing discussion about taking one of our top tier events to Saudi, hopefully, if he stops out negotiating me.
We'll talk about that later.
So there is a serious commitment and there is a long-term view to ultimately grow tennis in Saudi Arabia.
Excellent. Yeah, that's going to be super exciting. Can't wait to hopefully see some more tennis in Riyadh. Marc, you are a major deal maker in the world of sports. You've had your hands in a lot of transactions. I think AI is using you to learn the language of sports in order to be more informed. You have been early in the Middle East and seen the growth of it. Tell us a little bit how that came about with the initial wealth funds investing in sports, and now the kingdom obviously taking a major leadership role.
You know, looking at the evolution of sports, I think is important to see what has happened so we understand what's going on in the Middle East. Sports as an industry really took off around the turn of the 20th century, and it was in Europe. The center of gravity was Europe. Then after World War II, it moved to the United States and North America. Beginning of the 21st century, it moved to Asia for a relatively short period of time, actually. And then what we saw in a pretty rapid period is the center of gravity of sports moved to the Middle East for the reasons why it was in all the other places. What you had countries with capital, need for infrastructure, desire to create tourism, great leadership, and wanting to bring the world to them and expose themselves and their countries to the rest of the world also. So what you now have is a momentum where you're having tremendous amount of infrastructure being built, you're having expertise being developed, you're having capital being used and staying within the region, so that we now have a professional class that can operate sports in the Middle East, and we're seeing Saudi Arabia actually being the country that is now, even if it wasn't first, is now leading the way for the movement of the sports industry into the Middle East. It's a major shift, and it's a global shift, and I think it's one that is going to last for quite a few years.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And what we've seen at Lead on the sports technology side, we've also seen a tremendous openness of investing in technology and taking risks and applying new solutions to the game, whether that's fan engagement or how you sell your tickets or how you broadcast the games on TV and make it available to the world. So that bravery to be willing to fail as well as you're taking 3 steps ahead and maybe half a step backwards sometimes, I think is important.
Absolutely, and let's not neglect the fact that the sports world is moving more towards digitization on a global basis. And so the location of it taking place is less important, and with especially Saudi Arabia embracing AI and digitization, and especially embracing esports the way it has, that portends to a greater future where Saudi Arabia becomes even more of a hub for sports going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So Danny, you clearly have made an investment into MMA, right? That was one of the first investment of SURJ. Now you're going into sports media. There are other verticals that are being discussed at the moment, and we will see results being announced. But maybe clear up a little bit the mandate of SURJ Sports, because we've also heard, obviously, investments in Live Golf, and there's Newcastle United, the PIF is involved. What specifically do you see as SURJ Sports' mandate?
Yeah, SURJ Sports was set up as a wholly owned subsidiary of the PIF. Our role is to deploy the PIF's capital into the sports sector. What's probably unique about our mandate compared to a lot of other institutional investors is that we have a localization mandate as well as a global investment appetite. And that localization mandate is essentially how do we deliver a GDP accretive outcome for the sports sector in the region. As Marc sort of pointed to, it's pretty nascent. Although sport has been part of the social fabric of the kingdom for forever, football has been very much a staple for a long time. A lot of the other sports you talked about earlier on in the opening address are new to the country, and I think our role as an investor is to obviously deliver return on capital and find sports that we can put our capital to work in a transformational way that is having a positive impact on that sport globally, but also bringing that sport to life in some capacity back into the kingdom, whether that be a major event, whether that be a facility, a development pathway, something that's going to contribute to that economy, whether that be jobs, private sector investment. That's the interesting part of the job, I think, because investing in sport, Lots of us in the room do it. It's great. We're lucky to be working in a subject matter that we all love. But ultimately to see meaningful change in a social way and a well-being impact from what we do is equally rewarding.
Yeah, and if you look at the Kingdom's national sports strategy, you see obviously an element of building out priority sports, of which golf, tennis, soccer, football, basketball, and others are a strategy of. And one thing is investing in professional leagues and teams and assets. The other one is building a mass participation element. So while you certainly, I'm sure, have that in your deal flow as well to how to grow that, the tourism, I think one of the perfect mass participation sports is the sport of tennis or racket sports in general. Sometimes pickleball, paddle, easier to pick up for some people to get in the game of tennis. How do you see that evolving, and how do you see the chance of more Saudis picking up a tennis racket now that you guys are on the ground over there?
Look, I think the sport is in great health right now globally. Obviously, we are a truly global sport, so you can pinpoint any market as a single outlier. But generally speaking, it's in great health. It's very relevant from a cultural standpoint. Commercially speaking, obviously, talking about the ATP, tournaments are breaking financial records year on year coming out of COVID. Player compensation, which is the other half of our constituents, is at all-time high and going up significantly year on year, we just added 9 new partners since the beginning of the year. We're working on new IPs. I think across pretty much every dimension, things are going well. Now, the question is, how do you go about going to the next level? I probably would say that the single biggest opportunity that we have is to get closer with the WTA, our counterpart on the women's side. We're working on it. We work closer than ever before. We're discussing how we can take that to the next level, which for me is probably the most exciting project that we have on the table right now. And then I think in terms of global participation, I think Saudi is a great example. If you see today, there are 50,000 kids that are taking tennis in school. It wasn't the case a couple of years ago. So we like to think that we played a part in that, like in many other markets.
And that's a great point, and obviously getting closer to your women's counterpart with the WTA, and obviously unifying the sport of tennis that is both very popular to watch from a viewership standpoint for both the men and the women's competitions. I think the other interesting parts that you see in the sector is there are some sports that are emerging. Then there are sports where other countries have a leg up, right, that are leadership positions like the NFL in the US. I think it will be hard for anybody to take away that the Super Bowl will be the top American football event in the world. But Marc, given that you've seen this happen versus leagues and team investments versus other event-based, how do you see this emerging? Where do you see the best chance for the Kingdom to be successful?
There's a meaningful distinction between league-based sports and event-based sports. The Kingdom can do extraordinarily well with event-based sports. Formula One, boxing matches, ATP, tennis, golf. Danny's strategy at SURJ has been brilliant. Invest in sports where the sport itself will have at least some of the events take place within the Kingdom itself. That is exactly the kind of investment that makes perfect sense, both as investment and for the Kingdom, so people can appreciate it and enjoy it, as well as it being a good business and brings in tourism and people. It's much harder to create league-based sports and have them be sustainable. You need first significant population. Then you need people who have a history of going to it, businesses that have a history of supporting it. You need media that has a history of spending the money on it to be able to get the top talent. So for now at least, event-based sports such as the 2034 World Cup, such as the Asian Winter Games, such as the esports annual championship, such as the IOC giving Saudi Arabia the esports Olympic championship. Those are really the things that Saudi Arabia can do and do extraordinarily well, and is a great focus that they're doing. And it's a very intelligent approach and use of the capital and the intelligence and leadership that Saudi Arabia has. And it's really a brilliant strategy that Danny and the people at SURJ are applying.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I think obviously it's a brilliant strategy. Thanks, Marc. It's brilliant, brilliant. But on a serious note, the event strategy really is about inspiration, right? You can't expect someone to change their behaviour without being inspired by something. And when you bring a world-class tennis tournament to the kingdom and young Saudis go and see Djokovic or whoever play, they get inspired. So therefore they're likely to participate. So if you think about that dual mandate, the event-based strategy does provide that inspiration that will change someone's behaviour. And that's something that's really important as we evolve as a sporting nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to follow up on what you were saying, right? The league-based investment, how hard it is to get that off the ground from established markets that are also larger markets. I mean, you've even seen that in the US, right? You look at Major League Soccer, for example. It took 20 years and a lot of capital to even get some eyeballs on it before it started to take off. And obviously Inter Miami here is a huge success story in terms of value creation for the assets, but it's not easy to do even in currently at least the world's leading sports market. But a question that was just triggered by your comment, Danny, is for you, focused on your national mandate, adding to the GDP. There was a little nugget in the press release talking about a DAZN-MENA partnership. Tell us a little bit more that we didn't hear in that press release.
Yeah, I think as we evolve the sports industry, not just in Saudi but more broadly in the region, access to great content, world-class content is really important as part of that. There's no point us bringing these major events and building things like the Saudi Pro League if we don't have a world-class platform to engage our fans. I think from our perspective, going back to what I said earlier, what DAZN does is bring a youth audience. They're a direct-to-consumer, digital-first proposition. I hear lots of different stats bandied around the age profile of Saudi Arabia. It is young. The majority of the population are under 35. So they are digital native people. So us investing in linear media channels is not really a smart play, and for us in DAZN-MENA brings about an opportunity for us to really curate content specific to the region, bring in the international rights that DAZN have, like the NFL and the boxing, and really serve a really hungry sports community.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about tennis, right, you're going into a new market in Saudi Arabia, a fairly new market. You've been there for a little bit, and you have tremendous support from the PIF and the government as well in making that happen. Yet at the same time, tennis is going through a major change with, Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer either retired or at the end of their career. You can make that case for women's tennis to some degree as well, with Serena Williams retiring. Like all those new stars coming, but the big stars from the last 10, 20 years leaving. Do you see that as a challenge or as an opportunity?
Look, I think it's an opportunity, and that transition, I would almost say, has already happened. Federer has already retired, Nadal has already retired. Lots of concern about around those departures, but quite frankly, you have an amazing new generation, super talented, very diverse, different personalities, extremely marketable, and you can see the pool. So there is a strong desire to follow this new generation. So I would say definitely an opportunity. There is always a lot of attention on who's next across any sport, and we're no different. As a matter of fact, there is already people thinking about who's going to be the next one. There is a young Brazilian who is spectacular. He actually won the next gen ATP finals in Jeddah at the end of last year, and he's coming through through the ranks like a rocket. So there is already a lot of focus and desire for who's going to be next. So I think it's an opportunity.
That's great. And what's next after the World Cup in 2026, the 2030 World Cup, but eventually the one again back in the kingdom in 2034? And Marc, we mentioned the Super Bowl early on as the biggest sports event, the only one that's larger as a World Cup final, being watched every 4 years by more than half of the world. Give us a little bit outlook where you see the next 9, 10 years going towards the World Cup and what the kingdom will look like with all the mega projects coming to line and sports playing a big role.
Well, the next decade in sports on a global basis, what we think where we are today is going to be very different a decade from now. We just had this past weekend the NBA All-Star Game. We had the NBA Technology Summit Friday morning. The key speakers weren't sports people. Key speakers were Jensen Huang, the chairman and CEO of NVIDIA, Netflix. We had Google, the head of YouTube TV. Those were the key speakers because that's really what's happening now in the world of sports. the melding of technology and sports, globalization, digitization, and AI is the future. And one of the most important things that came out of it was the acknowledgement that anybody who thinks they know what sports is going to look like 5 years ago is fooling themselves, because they don't know. The best thing that you can do today is position yourselves and have the ability to adjust your investments as events warrant, because technology is changing so fast and consumer consumption is changing so fast that you need to be prepared to move along with it. It's really a fascinating time in our industry.
Yeah, funny that you bring that up. I was actually asked the question recently what role AI is going to play in the 2034 World Cup and what kind of solutions will be out there. And I was saying like all of those today will likely be outdated, right? Who knows what's going to happen? The future is certainly interesting. It's an exciting time to be alive. And one thing we know for sure, and we heard that from Alex Ohanian on the Changemakers board, is that sports has the biggest outlook in terms of a mega trend, because this is probably the only industry where humans still matter. And you want to see humans compete and human error, and you don't want to see robots fight against each other, right? So that, I think, bodes really well. Danny, can we see more deals this year from SURJ? How many deals are you trying to make? Like, talk us through like how many announcements we're going to see and how active you want to be in the market.
Look, I think the nature of the deals we do are quite different. They're complex because we're investing at a league level or an event level. You're dealing with the governance framework of a sport that's been around for 100 odd years. So you're going to need to change that governance model in order to create an investable proposition. So we've been working on a bunch of deals for over a year because of that complexity that we're trying to solve for. So I'm happy to say we're probably close on a couple of those deals. We should be announcing some in the next month or two, which I think will be, as I said before, transformational deals for the sports we're investing in. Obviously Massimo's driving a hard bargain in tennis, and we're probably going to walk away from that because all the old players are retiring and stuff. So.
That's great input. And then are you looking to, and I'll let you address that here in a second, but maybe we can have a live negotiation, but just to address this, are you then looking also to take your assets that you have in your portfolio then and get synergies out of it, like use the zone as a platform then in the assets you invest? Yeah,
I think, look, we're a minority investor in the assets we invest in, so of course the other shareholders in those investments are going to seek the best commercial deal they can get out of the market. And so we obviously will have a bias towards DAZN because we're an investor there, but we'll take the best deal that's being offered. But I think more broadly, the way we think about our investment portfolio is every IP in the world, including the ATP, have got a lot of service providers that deliver the product to the end consumer. And there's a lot of great companies that serve the industry in that value chain, and we're looking at investing in those as well as the IP themselves. So, our announcements will be a bunch of IP deals, but also a bunch of service providers that we believe are world-class and serve our IP well.
I look forward to talking on this in future panels. But Massimo, I want to hear your counter pitch as to why tennis is going to make a big contribution to SURJ Sports' portfolio if that was to be a deal, or whether you're going to find some kind of solutions going forward.
Look, I think we've been having discussion for a long time. I think it's a natural evolution of stuff that we have already done in the kingdom. So we look forward to the next step. They have been a very sophisticated counterpart. Let's put it at that. They keep us honest. Look, we're making progress. So I look forward to spending more time with Mr. Townsend here.
Yeah, fantastic. So, by the way, after this panel, there's going to be a second panel, so you have to stick with me, and I'll introduce 4 new amazing panelists to it. We'll be talking about women's sports, but as we do that, I wanted to find a little bit of a transition into this topic and get your views as well. Massimo, let's start with you on this, given that you brought up the WTA. You want to work closer together. How important do you think is that collaboration for tennis to send a signal to sports and for the growth of women's sports in general?
I would say for us, single biggest strategic priority. Obviously, tennis has a unique selling point in the fact that you can put men and women on the same stage. We have 1 billion fans roughly globally, very diverse culturally, but also from a gender standpoint. I think it's an amazing opportunity, and we look forward to accelerating that. Our sport suffers from fragmentation, I would say. A potential alignment, integration with the WTA will also help with that. So for us, definitely number one priority, and we have not been shy about it.
Yeah. And by the way, Marc said, 10 years ago, linear broadcasters were broadcasting and bidding for rights, and we were saying, how are they going to outbid each other, and how are those right deals are going to go up? And then all of a sudden, you had Netflix, you had Meta, you had all the digital providers, all the way up to Apple, competing in this with huge pockets, right, and upping the media deals more. Just like this case it was, just a few years ago where women's sports was growing, but not a lot of investment dollars were going in. How do you see this as an investor in this space?
You look, half the people on the planet are female, right? So if you're ignoring that consumer set, you're missing a trick. So certainly for us, we look at sports that are gender agnostic. I think as that serves the entire population of the world. So, I think the way football has evolved recently, I ran a football league in Australia, and that had a women's competition as well as a men's one, and it was challenging, to be honest. Commercially, it was difficult, but what we saw in the women's game that we didn't see in the men's game is growth. Like the growth opportunity is enormous. So when you think about an investor, what does an investor look for? It looks for growth. Now, I think some of the entry prices in women's sport at the moment are a little bit inflated, but I think the opportunity is clearly there, and in time, I think investors that are getting in now will benefit from that growth trajectory. Yeah,
right. And Marc, you with the global lens, do you think, looking at the growth of women's sports, you've seen it in basketball and in soccer here in the US particularly, you see some of that in Europe happening across several sports, you see it obviously in tennis. Do you think that is sophisticated enough already that it's tough to catch from a Saudi sports ambition perspective, or is it still early days that there could be leadership?
Here's the thing that we need to keep in mind when it comes to women's sports and the future of sports and technology, because technology is integrally involved with sports. The thing that is creating this additional layer of ecosystem are the stories, are the backgrounds of the people, are the drama of the athletes themselves and their backstories and their families, as cultural icons, as human beings, as people who we get to know. That has added a layer on the economics that has made the investment in sports something that the tech companies, brands, and all sorts of consumer products who want to become part and make investments at an even greater level in sports. Women are at the core of that kind of storytelling. That is what I believe is where the future of women's sports is. Not necessarily the competition on the field as growth, but the storytelling and the understanding and the background information, who the people are and how they integrate into our lives and how we connect with them. And that is something that we're going to see just explode over the next 5, 10 plus years.
Yeah, phenomenal. So sports is a mega trend, and we'll see that for the next 10, 20 years, live sports particularly, from all types of sports and all types of verticals. And by the way, we can talk about this for hours. I think what's really worthwhile, if you haven't been, take a trip down to Riyadh or Jeddah and experience a fight, or experience a Formula 1 race, or an Al Ittihad or Al Nassr game yourself. You'll see the infrastructure that is forming right there. You see the tremendous, mega significant players that are first movers getting there. In 5 years from now, everybody will be there, so congratulations for you making that first step to coming over. After this session, which I'm going to wrap up right now, if you have any questions for these gentlemen, I'd ask you to please take those in the back so that we can switch over. We're going to take a 3-minute break, and then we're going to talk about women's sports and the role of partnerships. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.